Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, for our final session of today. We will have two sessions with multiple speakers. For our second session, it will be a brief introduction to the history of AI from Deep Blue to Copilot by Vincent. And then for our session right now, we have Mohammed and Ed, who will be presenting Security Business Central and customer-driven best practices and real-world cases.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Ed, that guy over there, Edmondo. I've been working with Business Central and specifically Microsoft for the last 9 years. I'm a member of the control plane team, and for the last 3 years, I'm actually leading security initiatives across Business Central.
Yeah, and my name is Omer, and I've been working for Microsoft for almost 8 years now, and I'm part of the engineering systems team and also security champ for them. And I and Ed have been working on many security initiatives, so we want to share some thoughts and real-world cases with you guys.
Yeah, so Omer and I usually work behind the scenes in Business Central, keeping our cloud customers secure and up to date. But with the growing number of security-related questions from partners and customers through Yammer specifically, but as well as through support tickets, we decided to host a session to ask the most frequent questions and see how we can apply the best practices from the Microsoft Secure Future initiative that I'm going to introduce right now to customer scenarios. So let's briefly talk about the Microsoft Secure Future initiative. So, and let's step back into 2023 for a second. It was the year when cyber attacks got smarter and sneaker, AI-powered scams, supply chain hacks, and they were pushing companies to and governments to step up their game in the security game. And Microsoft's response was kicking off the Cyber Secure Future Initiative, which is a long-term plan to rethink the way our products are being built across the whole Microsoft, making security the top priority of the company. So far, Microsoft has invested in over 13 months, the equivalent of 34,000 engineering working full-time, not obviously only across Business Central, but across the whole Microsoft itself. The initiative itself is built with around 3 principles: secure by design, secure by default, and secure operation. Secure by design means security comes first when designing every product or service, not only Business Central. Secure by default, it means that the default when you're creating a new tenant or a new environment or any other resource in Azure should be secure exactly by default, doesn't require any additional configuration. And then secure operation, which means that all the security controls and monitoring has to continuously be improved to catch all the existing and future threats. The initiative is built around 6 pillars: protect identities and secret, protect tenants and isolate, protect networks and engineering systems. And these pillars contain overall 28 objectives, which most of them are actually long-term and require, they span several years of work. These objectives are supported by standards, which are codified requirements, and these code standards are continuously improved into paved paths, which are actually blueprint for the developers to implement. So we don't really want to talk about the Secure Future initiative overall. You can actually read all of it in the links there. You can find it on the web, but there is a clear explanation of all the reports, and actually every 4 months there is a detailed report with all the progress in percentage across the whole Microsoft of everything. What we want to do is to focus only on 2 of these objectives, and specifically to what we have done in Business Central and how these changes can be applied to customers and partners. So first of all, we are going to focus on the protect identities and secret, and specifically in this specific pillar, only about 1 of the objectives, which is about protecting application with system-managed credentials. What does it actually mean? It means that for all the Azure resources that are building up Business Central in production, we are talking about 36,000 storage accounts, 1,700 service buses, more than 200,000 SQL databases, and a few Cosmos DBs as well. and as well the Enter ID applications. As part of this initiative, we completely removed every credential, every storage account keys, every SQL database username and password, and only using Enter ID authentication. So that was obviously a kind of significant amount of work that kept us busy for several months. But that got us thinking, like, can we do something about it? Can we apply this to some of the scenarios that partners or customers are using? So here's the first scenario: web service calls to Business Central APIs. Now, a few of you are actually familiar with this, are using service-to-service authentication with Business Central. And if you have been using it, you probably have been following the instructions that are basically stating to create an Enter ID application, give it some specific permissions, and then in this little part over there says, create a new client secret, and then from your application, you will be using and leveraging that client secret to authenticate. Now, similarly, if you're doing a call to the Business Central Admin API, the documentation at the moment states exactly the same thing, that you have to create a secret. Omer, is there anything we can do about it?
Yes, absolutely. Let me switch my screen. So, before we talk about secretless calls to Business Central, let's talk about some of the pitfalls of client secrets. They are obviously can be exposed and stolen, leading to potential breaches in your organization. They require manual work from your side. They need to be rotated periodically, and they need to be stored securely. That will increase the operational workload on your organization. Then if you have multiple applications running with multiple secrets, you need to manage all of them. And this can be a complex process and can be error-prone as well. And then it could lead to sometimes be hard-coded secrets in code, which will violate compliance standards in your organization. So what can we do instead of using secrets? We use managed identities. And these take care of all those pitfalls that I mentioned before. They remove the need to manage secrets. They also, in turn, provide access to role-based access control in Azure. So you can give very granular control to your application through the managed identities. And then they integrate seamlessly with all the Azure services. I have this small diagram that shows how they work in practice. So basically, when you enable managed identity on an Azure resource, it becomes available on that resource for you to be able to authenticate. And it creates a service principal for you in Entra ID. And you can use that service principal to give those granular role-based access controls that I was talking about earlier to the application that you want to access. And then from inside this Azure resource, you will be able to get an access token to the resource you want to get to. So most of you might already have an Entra application that you are using with a client secret, perhaps, to call the Business Central APIs. And you can actually keep using the same Entra application. But instead of using the credentials now, we will use federated credentials instead of the client secrets, I mean. And here it's a very overview of how this works. So we will use managed identities to set up a trust relationship between our application, federated credential configuration, and the managed identities. And at the time of the authentication, the Azure resource will get a federated token request through managed identities, which will then be checked against the federated credential configuration. And if everything checks out, Entra ID will give an access token to you that you can then use to access the resources that you want to. So my demo is exactly how that really works. We'll set up an Entra application with federated credentials, then give appropriate API permissions to the app, set up app on customer environment and grant consent, and showcase secretless API calls to Business Central. So let's see how this works. So this is simulating a partner tenant. And in my partner tenant, I have created a managed identity. And one thing to notice over here is the client ID that we will be using later to request an access token from the Azure VM resource. And then I have created an Entra application. And if we see the API permissions under this one, we have API read-write all access from Business Central. over here. And under certificates and secrets, we have this federated credentials that have been set up, and it's trusting the managed identity that I just showed you earlier. We also have a client secret over here. That's just to showcase the demo. I'll be removing this later to show you that we can also call the API without it. And once you have this app set up, you'll take the client ID and you'll send it to your customer. And then I have a customer environment over here. They will need to go to the Entra, application section. And I have already set up this one over here. So they will need to add that client ID over here, grant the consent, and then over here we can also leverage the permission sets inside Business Central, and you can just only give permission to what you want the partner to be able to access. So in this case, for example, we've just only given read access to the data in Business Central. So this setup is done, and then we have this Azure VM that I created in the partner tenant, where I have that managed identity and application. And under identity of this virtual machine, user assigned, I'm trusting that managed identity. And this enablement makes this identity available on this virtual machine that we will use now. So I have logged into this VM right here. And I'll just show you some code. This is standard way of getting an access token using MSAL library. We have the application ID in our partner tenant. This resource tenant ID is the customer tenant ID. And then this is the managed client ID, which we'll use later. But I'm first using the client secret that I showed you over there to get an access token. And then under that environment, where we gave the consent, I'm just requesting a list of all the companies in that particular environment. So let's just run this and see if this works. So we see we get a list of companies. This environment has 2 right now. So that's how it was working before. But now let's go and do our app, and let's delete that client secret so we make sure that it's not being used. Now we only have the federated credential over here that is assigned to that VM. And I have some code over here that shows how to get an access token from there. I'll just comment out this part. And uncomment this one. So as you can see, there's no password or credential that is being used over here. The only thing we need is the ID of the managed identity that we created before. And we create a client assertion using that managed identity using this code over here. And then we pass that to our confidential client. And then it can get an access token for us without using any secrets. And then let's run this and see if this still works as we want it to. So we were able to get the access token, and we are still able to call inside the environment, and we can get the list of the companies from there as well. So that's good. That works as expected. So the takeaway from here is that please start migrating to managed credentials. As you saw, the code is actually quite straightforward, and it will bring you a lot of benefits. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is auditing in Microsoft Purview and what that means for Business Central. I hope you guys are familiar with what Microsoft Purview is. It is the de facto solution from Microsoft for auditing, and it has a lot of benefits. It tracks user and admin activity for security compliance. It has risk monitoring capabilities, detects anomalies, unauthorized access, policy violations in your organization. Then you can set up different data lifecycle management policies. And it also has a portal where you can search for the audit logs across the whole tenant, not only just for Business Central. And what it specifically means for Business Central is that Business Central automatically emits all the auditable events to Purview. We have a full list of events in our Learn site. Maybe we should take a look at that quickly. So under here, you can see we have some events. So anytime you do anything to administer the environment, configure extension, administer the user, configure Copilot, an event will be emitted to Purview. And under each activity, these are the events, and under each event, we have a list of activities. So for administered environment event, for example, anytime an environment is created, renamed, copied, scheduled, and updated for, we will get auditable logs inside Microsoft Purview. So that's all great. Now let's see what we can build upon Microsoft Purview in our case. So we'll set up an Entra app with federated credentials and give the appropriate API permissions. And we'll build Azure functions to query and receive audit results from Microsoft Purview. And then we'll build a simple logic app to query these results and do something actionable based on that. So what I've done over here is, it's right over here. I have an Entra application. And if I go to the API permissions, we have given permission to audit logs query read all through Microsoft Graph. And under certificates and secrets, there's no client secret over here. It's only a federated credential that is trusting a managed identity. And then I have built 2 Azure functions. One of them is building a query and sending to Microsoft Purview. And the other one is receiving results and returning those records. And under this, if we see identity and user assigned, we have assigned the managed identity to this function. So we do not need any secret. Client secret inside this function. It can just leverage the managed identity inside. So let's see what code is behind these 2 functions that I showed over here. So the first function is just using this similar kind of code that you've seen before, using managed identity to get an access token to Microsoft Graph. And then it's building a query to send to Microsoft Purview. We're just doing last 24 hours, and we're getting all the records of type Business Central. And we're just sending off this query. And in the second function, we are, through the ID of the query that we sent in the previous one, we're getting the results. And in this particular case, we are looking for administered environment event and the renamed environment activity. So if you find any audit event in last 24 hours where somebody has renamed an environment on your tenant, we will return those records. And how am I using this in the end? Is that I have a simple logic app that's running on a recurrence every 24 hours. It will submit the query, parse the result, wait for a little bit for the query to complete, get the results, then parse it, and then the condition is that if there was any record returned, it will send you an email. So I hope this gives you guys some inspiration how you can create these simple automations that will let you know of any suspicious activity that's happening on your tenant. So the takeaway from this one is that you should look at the exhaustive list of events and activities Business Central emits to Purview and familiarize yourself with the Purview audit search portal. I will show you how that looks as well. This is the Purview portal, and you can basically manually search for audit events over here. And if you're looking for example, Business Central, there's a record type for Business Central that you can select over here. And it's the same process. You will create the query, it will run for a while, get the results, and then you can see the results. And then you have some inspiration of how to set up quick automations that will let you know of any suspicious activity on your tenant. So from here, back to you.
All right. So until now, we focused on the examples on the identity layer, so basically on who is accessing resources rather than from where they are accessing resources. And to build a defense in-depth strategy, you need to combine more than one of these methodologies. So let's talk then briefly about the protect network layers. So one of the objective of the protect network layer, pillar, especially objective 2, was to apply network segmentation and network isolation and micro segmentation to all Microsoft services, not only Business Central. So in order to do that, every service in Business Central had to have something that we call service tags. Service tags are actually predefined and reserved set of IP ranges that are dedicated to specific services. I'm going to explain what actually this is about, but the main reason, as you can deduct, is actually to be able then to create firewall rules for upstream and downstream services, to only allow the traffic to services based on their outgoing and incoming IP addresses. Again, based on this one, what we have recognized is that, so first of all, we had service tags in Business Central since 2023. So it's not really something very new. But we realized that in order to adhere to the Secure Future Initiative requirements, we had actually to make some additional changes to be able to segment slightly more all our network. And actually, with this as well, we introduced support for IPv6. One important thing we actually realized as part of this process is that our documentation that we have published on aka.ms.bc security, there is a link at the bottom of this presentation, at the end of this presentation. It actually tells you what can't be done, not really what you can do or how you will be able to do it. For example, I'm going to show you an example on trying to use service tags for storage account. And basically, the documentation explains you very well why you can't do it, but it doesn't tell you how you could achieve that. Okay, so this is actually the customer scenario that we are trying to solve. So let's say you have an environment on a cluster, and then you have partner resources or customer resources that are in a subscription hosted by the customer, either a customer web service or a customer storage account, and the outgoing traffic is coming from Business Central using a public IP address. Similarly, resources could be behind a customer firewall or some other sort of programmable firewall. And then, so you have calls originating from Business Central, either from a PTE or for an app, and you, as a responsible of the services, the customer-related services, you only want to allow traffic from Business Central, not from the whole internet. Now, as I said, we're going to talk briefly about service tags. As I said, service tags are a group of dedicated IPv ranges, so they are not really part of the Azure Cloud service tag. They are kind of dedicated one, reserved only for Business Central. They are IPv6 and IPv4 ranges. And we have within Business Central other different service tags that we are using internally, and they are not publicly available. The list of these IP addresses is updated, not super frequently, not very frequently, but it is updated and it's published. There are different ways on how to obtain this list of IP addresses, and I'm going to show you how to do it. Now, the important thing about these is that these IP addresses are being reused. So they are part of ranges, and every time we create new clusters or we remove clusters, we delete clusters for upgrades or several other reasons why we are creating and working on clusters. But basically, it's reusing IP addresses from the same address pool. So it's not like we are constantly updating this list, adding new addresses. But there might be reasons, for example, when we are onboarding to a new Azure region, or we have reached the capacity of the number of reserved IP ranges, that we will be requesting for new IP ranges on an existing region, and then this list of IP addresses is going to change. The service tag, which is actually the cumulative list of all these IP address ranges, is published together with a lot of other service tag tags published by Microsoft, and it's a list which contains all the IP addresses for all the different regions. It can be used in network security groups to create ACL rules, but as well on on-premise firewalls which are allowing you to block traffic from specific ranges. So I'm going to show a few demos. Now, there is a slight issue with this, which is mentioned here. So a few weeks ago, this service tag here, which is the Dynamics 365 Business Central, which has been active and publicly available since 2023, due to a change in Azure networking, has been switched from GA to development mode. So the service tag is still valid and available, however, is not selectable via the portal. There is a workaround to get around this problem, which is basically just directly specifying the tag in PowerShell when you're creating the rule or using an ARM template. But in a couple of weeks, it's going to be resolved because there is a change now that is being pushed out. Now, okay, so I'm going to show you the scenario that I want to try to resolve. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to demo service tags. So I have a network security group. As I said, the network security group is this resource that can be associated to VNet and directly to networking interfaces on VMs. In here, I have created a network security rule, which is allowing traffic on port 443 TCP for all the Dynamics 365 Business Central service tags. So all IPv6 and IPv4 addresses of Business Central will be able, traffic coming from these addresses will be able to go through this network security rule. Just to mention the issue that I was talking about here, when you're creating the service tag, you can select service tag as a source, and in the list here, you normally will be able to see Dynamics 365 Business Central, but unfortunately, as I mentioned, for the next couple of weeks, it's not showing up here. As a workaround, you can just basically do an ARM template and write the name of the tag in there, the ARM template. So it's kind of a temporary workaround, but the rule actually works, and there is no problem in there. So this is actually how you can create rules specifying the service tag. But before talking about some of the kind of problems with service tags themselves, I want to show you what these ranges, these IP ranges, look like, and a way to actually obtain them. So for that, I created a workflow in a Logic app that is calling an Azure REST API, which is called service tags, okay? Could be any subscription, because this is actually not getting IPs for the resources that are related to the subscription. This is basically listing the whole list of service tags available in Microsoft. So again, talking about managed identities, all right? So in here, we are using the system-assigned managed identity of the assigned to the Logic app itself to be able to query the list of service tags. Why? Because this endpoint actually requires authentication. So I have added read access to using RBAC permissions to the subscription itself, and with that, we are able to get the list of service tags. If I check the latest running history, just to show you how the output looks like. So this request, by the way, doesn't have any parameter that needs to be passed or anything else. The raw output is a JSON message that contains the list of all the service tags, public service tags published by Microsoft. So action group is actually a service tag. I don't know exactly which service this is about, but as you can see here, it obtains the list of all the IPv4 addresses and long list, and the IPv6 addresses as well. So if you create a firewall rule with action group as a service tag, you are kind of sure that the tag is always updated and will always, without any user intervention, be able to get the latest versions. Now, I want to focus for a second here on this change number. Change number is actually the version number for these IP prefixes. So every time there is a new specific IP range that is being added to this service tag, the number is increased. Why is it important? Because I'm going to show you an automation that I have created to update the firewall rules on a key vault only when that number increases. So another way to obtain the list of service tags is actually, the IPs, is actually through this published publicly available URL, which is just directly the JSON file itself, same result that you're getting through the other call. The only difference is that in this case, it doesn't require any user authentication. But I just wanted to showcase a different way to obtain the list of IP addresses. So in there, from the JSON object, I'm actually just filtering out only for the Dynamics 365 Business Central service tag. And in there, because some of the resources, such as, for example, Key Vault, are only supporting IPv4 ranges in the firewall rules. They're not supporting IPv6. So in here, I'm using a kind of a small trick to identify which ones are IPv6, which ones are IPv4, and construct two arrays with the IP addresses. And I'm going to store here in a variable the change number as well that I did show earlier. Now, based on that one, I'm as well, sorry, not based on that one, as well, I'm getting the list of Key Vault settings. The reason why is I want to update the Key Vault, the simulation for the customer created Key Vault that I have in here. I only want to update it, obviously, if there has been a change in this version of IP addresses, this change number. So in order to do that, I have stored here in a tag on the Key Vault itself the change number of the latest version that I have used to update these ones. And just to have a look briefly, the firewall rules that I have at the moment on the Key Vault are these two kind of random IP addresses that I have just added there. So the automation that I have written here is just getting the list of, the tag from the Key Vault itself is kind of doing an if condition between the value of the tag and the value of the service tag version that I have obtained from Business Central. Then it's constructing a network ACL object that is then used here to call the Key Vault itself and do a patch on the firewall rules and update them. And then it's setting the tag and sending me a message. So if we run this automation now, let's see, should be quick. Okay, so this actually, by the way, obviously, with the recurrence, can be scheduled to run even every day. There is no issue. So I'm getting the list of service tag in here. I'm constructing these two arrays, as I said, of IPv6 and IPv4 ranges, IPv4 and IPv6. Then I'm getting the tag from the Key Vault. Here it was 15, and I'm initializing a variable. And in here, I'm actually, because 15 is obviously lower than 16, I'm going to update the firewall rules. Here, I'm constructing the actual object that is needed for the REST API to update it. I'm updating the Key Vault here, and then I'm setting the tag to version 16. And then hopefully, I'm even gonna post a message here to my workflow. Where is it? Here. That states a change has been detected in the public IP ranges and the Key Vault firewall rules have been updated from version 15 to 16. Now, if we just go back to the customer Key Vault, okay, refresh. Yeah, we can see that the change version of the tag is 16. So the next time this is going to run is not going to update any firewall rule. And in here, it has populated all the rules, like all the firewall rules with the all Business Central IP addresses, which, yeah. All right, so, okay, going back here. So, yeah. Now, one of the questions we are getting quite often is, can I use service tags on a storage account? This is one of the most common questions we are actually getting. I might be tempted to say yes, but it is not true. Okay, it doesn't work. So first of all, you can't use service tags on a storage account. The storage account itself in the network firewall rule only supports IPv4 ranges. But I mean, you could use an automation such as the one we have created to update these firewall rules. However, there is a big question mark, which is, unfortunately, if the VNet of the calling service is in the same or paired Azure region as the storage account, you can't actually create. The reason is you can't actually use firewall rules. The reason is with IPv4 ranges. the main reason is there is a limitation in the Azure networking, and the IP addresses that is seen by the storage account itself in the firewall rules. You can actually check that if you're enabling the diagnostics logs on the storage account, is an internal IP address. So the calls are anyway routed through the internal network, even if you know, you haven't said that explicitly. So short answer is no, you can't really use it. You might try as a workaround to create a storage account in another region, but you might not want to do that for, I don't know, compliance or privacy region. Maybe you have the storage accounts in North Europe, and you want to keep as well your storage, sorry. You have the application services in North Europe, and you want to keep the storage accounts as well in North Europe. Now, so then what can I use? Can I use virtual network rules? Another way is actually to specify directly the ID of the subnet within the VNet on where the Business Central environment is actually created. So in this example, you can see you have clusters. Our cluster internally have a VNet. At the moment, we are not exposing it publicly, but even if we were to expose it, will this be possible? Not really, because when we are upgrading or moving environments from one cluster to the other, that will have a new VNet. So the communication, like that will not be allowed listed, so you can't really use that. So then is there a solution for all this problem? So there is a way to actually almost seamlessly work with this, which is creating an Azure function. Azure functions themselves support firewall rules which are based on service tags. So as you can see here, you can create in the Azure function itself, in the networking configuration, you can select to allow only specific IPs or service tags to call into the Azure function, and then you can specify to have a deny rule and only allow Dynamics 365 Business Central service tag, as in the picture. So in that case, when the environment is moved over to another cluster, you will be able to connect to it. Now, the storage account, which is behind the Azure function, that's could be completely off the internet, and you can use private links to write to that. That's not a problem. The main advantage of this approach, obviously, you don't have to maintain any automation or anything for the IP ranges. So a few takeaways from this session. Where possible, go secretless. Obviously, this demo works if you are in control of the resources, right? If you have the caller resource is actually in Azure, and you can assign a managed identity to it. If it's not in Azure, or for some developer scenarios, you can't really use federated identity credentials. So, but if you can, and you're moving the caller workloads to Azure, then you can go secretless using managed identities where possible. In some cases, you can't use the managed identity directly, as Omer did show. You have to use an Enter ID application. You have to specify, you have to allow
the API permission.
Yeah, to allow the API permissions as well. In that case, you can still use managed identities, use the federated identity credentials. For Azure resources, obviously try to switch over to use Enter ID authentication. So disable, one way to be sure, and actually it's the way that some of these secure initiative KPIs are actually tracking success, is by disabling local authentication on the resources. So SQL, storage, Service Bus, and Cosmos DB as well, they are all having a setting which has been added by the Secure Future Initiative to completely block any other type of authentication that is not Enter ID. And ultimately, as I said, this is the way we are kind of measuring success to make sure that we are only allowing Enter ID authentication. One of the questions may be, okay, but I need to create SaaS URLs. You can still create SaaS URLs as well for your storage account. Using one of the identities, obviously, that has access. One of the constraints is that the maximum validity for that SaaS URL is 7 days. Was much more before, when that was actually created based on the storage account key under the hood. Now, one other thing actually is making sure you have anonymous access disabled on the blob storages. Obviously, you don't want to do all this work related to authentication and have anonymous blob access enabled. And then as we mentioned, as part of the networking effort, where possible, obviously, add a second layer of protection, adding blocking traffic to your resources using firewall rules. And in the future, there is network security perimeter, which is a feature now in Purview, which will actually simplify all of this, hopefully. We think it's going to be great. And another thing we didn't have time to talk about is about elevating yourself to have access only when needed. So obviously avoid having persistent elevated access. There is a feature called PIM in Azure that you can use to elevate your permissions only when needed, and please leverage that. Now, the documentation for a few of these features, even the ones that are telling you what not to do, are under AK.ms BC Security, but it will be refreshed soon. We are planning to revamp all that documentation, include the samples from today's session as well. And then one last thing, if you have vulnerabilities in BC, if you find a vulnerability, please report it using that link. We have a bounty program as part of All Dynamics, and you will even have the chance of getting some rewards out of that. Now, there is another session that we are recommending you to go to, which is tomorrow, which is about securing your AL code. So Derek is going to host that, and then we can open up the Q&A. You can reach out to us directly, or
I'll look up if there's a question online.
Any question?
Yep.
Hi. In regards to the managed permission, not permissions, the not secret way.
Managed identity.
Managed identity, thank you. Do they also have an expiration date of 2 years, or are they permanently?
They are permanent.
Perfect. Good. That's all I needed.
So the way it works is that it's basically getting the managed identity is assigned to an Azure resource, and the Azure resource is getting a token from an internal endpoint. The token has a short validity, but the assignment of the identity is, depending on you. So.
Yeah, also just want to clarify that there are two kinds of managed identities. The one I showed is a user-assigned managed identity, and then there is a system-assigned managed identity. And that one is refreshed when the resource is gone, then the system identity is also gone. But this user one stays, and you can assign it to multiple resources.
I'll give a T-shirt.
Yes.
Any other
questions? There's one. You give the T-shirt.
Let me give the T-shirt.
Yes, so I'm using a client secret authentication from within Business Central. Is it possible to use Federation authentication?
From within Business Central?
Yes.
Ed?
No, unfortunately, that part of the flow still is not changing. There are several reasons, but we are in a SaaS environment. We don't have identities per tenants. Yeah.
It's a multi-tenant environment, so it's not possible right now. Yeah, a T-shirt, perhaps. Any other questions?
Is there any question on the app?
You cannot use managed identity and secret is not secure. What would be the recommended way for integration with external applications when we're coming into BC?
You mean coming from outside in? Or
yeah, from outside. Because if I give a secret, right, someone who steals it can access it. I cannot limit on BC side that, hey, that guy that comes, that is really that guy who I give access to.
Yeah, I mean, managed identities work inside Azure, as we said before. If it's an external caller, then I don't think we have any other solution for it right now.
Calls from Business Central to the outside?
No, from outside to Business Central, for example.
From outside to Business Central.
How can I ensure that outside the person is one I gave a...
I don't know, maybe we conditional access policies on the tenant itself.
Yeah, but what if it's expected?
Yeah.
It's yeah.
I don't know.
It's yeah.
We'll go back to that question.
Oh, there's one up there.
Hi. So I'm technically new to this. So what about security went on-prem clients? Or is it just for SAS?
Yeah, this one was for SaaS. I think we would have to get back to you on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can't use managed entities in on-prem. It's you can't assign an identity to.
Yeah.
You need a resource in Azure to be able to assign managed identities. All right. So thanks a lot. Feel free to reach out, or we are going to be at the booth later. Thank you.